So, like I was saying, let's just start, kind of at the beginning, and tell me a little bit about how you became a journalist and what your writing background is.
Sure. So I went to school for creative writing and journalism, in part because journalism and writing were always things that people told me I was good at, and I tend to pursue things that people tell me I'm naturally good at rather than trying new things. That pretty much explains why I've done everything in my life. So yeah, I went to school for that. Sorry, opening seltzer.
Oh, you're fine.
Yeah, so I went to college for that.
And did you say where you went to school?
Oh, NYU.
Got it. Okay. So, are you from New York, or do you just live there now?
I'm originally from outside of Boston.
Got it. Okay.
But I came to New York for school.
And you just kind of stayed on?
And then I stayed here, yeah.
Got it. Yeah, I mean, that kind of seems to be still, even though, it still seems to be the writing epicenter, even though maybe I had this perception that had changed. But the last writer that I interviewed also lives in New York.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's still a perception that everything is very New York-centric right now, and, obviously the major publications are based on the coast for the most part.
Mm-hmm.
I think people are people are definitely rejecting that idea, and trying to push publications to become more accepting of writers and freelancers from wherever. Mm-hmm. And I think that because we're all learning how to work in this remote environment, I'm hoping that publications are going to be more accepting of staff writers who aren't based in New York. Because obviously New York is expensive. It's not affordable for everyone. It's definitely not affordable on most writer salaries. So, at some point, as an industry, we're going to have to stop being so stuck up about living in New York and just saying, you can live anywhere and still be an ace journalist. Mm-hmm.
And I'd just like to enter in a note for the record that my cat is purring. So if anyone can hear that, that's what's happening. Yeah, it's definitely been a subject I've been thinking about a lot lately. Not necessarily just affordability, but how the quote-unquote mainstream media and a lot of these big publications, what issues they have. And affordability and location and writer salary is definitely part of that. There's a lot of problems with the media, but that's definitely one of them.
Yeah, I mean, you can tell when a publication hires a freelancer who's not from a small town to report on a small town issue. And whenever that happens, you always see people from that town who are journalists being like, hey, you could have just hired us. We're already here. We don't need someone flying in specifically to write about, this thing that we've all been living with.
Right, yeah. I've seen a lot of conversations.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say I've seen a lot of conversations about that kind of parachute journalism on Twitter lately.
Yeah, I mean, especially with the Portland protests and everything going on around there. Staffers are flying into Portland, where it's Portland has a pretty hefty crew of journalists already. Employ us, pay us.
And you'll get a better story because of it anyway.
Exactly.
Right. Well, I'll get to the newsletter in a second, but I kind of want to talk about a couple other things first. And I know that you mentioned on Twitter that you do some bio writing for real estate agents. So I just wanted to ask you, how much of your writing is journalism and how much of it is other stuff?
I mean, at this point, very little of it is journalism, which bums me out a lot. Mm-hmm. But I haven't done that much bio stuff in a while. But I'm working with a few content marketing agencies, and working with them on their clients. So that obviously pays a lot better. And what else? I have a newsletter. time, and I do have something I'm working on now. But yeah, it's really not a ton anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of something I've been having to deal with just from, I don't know, like an identity crisis of sorts of what am I actually doing with my life? And is this the direction I want to be taking? So it's an ongoing issue for me of whether or not this is actually what I want to be doing, or if it's just something I've fallen into.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it sounds like you're like, a lot of us in that we can't necessarily pay all of our bills with journalism. I mean, I have, one content marketing client, and I opened up a second credit card to pay for a freelancer sort of content marketing program to help me with sales, because I really struggle to get new content marketing clients, but that's where all the money is. So I totally get that, because it's like, I set out to be a journalist, but that isn't always necessarily what I end up doing, and that can be frustrating.
Yeah, and there's so much about content marketing and branding that goes against my journalistic instincts. And while it doesn't feel great, the fact that I can afford to live in New York does feel great.
Mm-hmm.
So, I don't know, that's, I guess, what I have to do right now.
Yeah, I would say you're not alone in that. So I wouldn't. Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about the newsletter specifically. When did you start it, and what gave you the idea? And for those of anyone I feel like everybody who's listening to this audio is going to be familiar with your newsletter, but it's called Opportunities of the Week, and you basically curate calls for pitches from editors on Twitter, right?
Yeah. Okay. So I started it in 2018 because it was something I was doing anyway all the time. I was just retweeting all this stuff, and I've been a member of some groups on Facebook that were doing similar things, but I found those to be incredibly kind of toxic environments for one reason or another.
Mm-hmm.
And I decided I want to offer similar services, but not making it anything that's an open forum, because that just invites all sorts of chaos. So I wanted to offer these services, and because I was doing them anyway, it was pretty easy for me to just put them in a newsletter and send it out. And when I originally started it, I wanted it to be free, and I was very concerned about keeping it kind of like the anti-gatekeeper newsletter, because I wanted everyone to be able to access it regardless of their income, and if not everyone has the time to look for freelance opportunities, and at that moment I did have the time, and that was just part of something that I scheduled into my day. And then a few months later it converted into a paid thing, just $1 a month, because with the amount of subscribers I have, I can charge a pretty low amount and still feel like I'm making enough to live on.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, so the impetus was just like, we need to make freelancing more accessible for everyone. And at that moment, there really wasn't a forum that provided that without its own toxic essence.
Right. So let me ask you about your audience. You mentioned, like you said, that you have several thousand subscribers. Did you grow your audience through the newsletter, or did you already have the followers on Twitter? Like, kind of how did that growth happen for you?
A little bit of both. So because I was a member of these groups on Facebook, and because it originally wasn't a paid thing, I was able to promote what I was doing in those Facebook groups. So a lot of people signed up through that. And then people already knew me on Twitter. Not as much as they do now. I definitely have a much greater audience now. But I would say it's a little bit half and half. People come to me because other people referred them to my newsletter. People come to me because they see me ask what rates are, or just like think something I tweet is stupid and funny. But yeah, it's a bit of both. Got it.
So what's been the most beneficial part of having the newsletter or the platform that you do, or just your favorite part? But, what would you say is the most positive part of the project? A lot of P words there.
The most positive part, I mean, it's definitely introduced me to a lot of people who I wouldn't have talked to in any other capacity. It's definitely brought in my understanding of who can be a freelance journalist, and what different freelance journalists are going through right now. Like, I mean, even when I charged $1 a month, there were people who couldn't afford that, and they told me why, and it was like, you can be in the New York Times but barely be able to afford rent. And I don't think that's something a lot of people realize, that having a big name doesn't necessarily translate to economic means. And that's definitely something that I've been able to learn through doing this newsletter and talking to everyone, and just kind of being more understanding of everyone has their boundaries, everyone has their limits of what they can do for work, everyone has their level of understanding about technology, about the industry. Like, I mean, people are coming from all over, and I think I've just been more open to hearing other people's experiences since I started this. And just been introduced to people, like I said, who I wouldn't normally come across. And it's nice to do something where I feel like my work's being appreciated, because, like, as a freelancer, a lot of what you do, the interactions are pretty basic. It's you send something to someone, they say it's good or not, they'll send you back edits, you give them back the edits, and that's kind of your entire relationship. And very rarely does someone say, like, I really appreciate what you're doing, it's helped me so much. So having something like that in my life has definitely made my life a bit better. Just like up my mood.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, in the last year, I've had 2 editors who've been like, hey, this is great work. Like, thank you for working hard. It is that's something that I feel like I don't really even think about that much, but you're right. Those conversations are pretty transactional, and sometimes it's even hard to call an editor an acquaintance because you don't really know them.
Yeah.
So what's something that's been really hard about having the newsletter? Has there been anything that's been really difficult or challenged you?
Yeah, I mean, one thing that has definitely been hard, and I'm sure you witnessed this on my Twitter, is the fact that I'm horrible at setting boundaries for myself. And I constantly feel like I need to go out of my way to help people and do it for free, and just like I've kind of established myself online as trying to be like the most generous person humanly possible, and that's resulted in a lot of like incredible amounts of going out, and people taking advantage of my work and just not treating the amount of labor I do with any degree of respect. So now I'm trying to strengthen those boundaries without becoming the kind of gatekeeper that I resent so much. So like today I announced that I'm no longer going to be retweeting freelance opportunities. If you want them, you can subscribe. But like my newsletter is still going to be pay what you can, and I can still give it out for free if you need me to. So like just kind of setting limits hard. And setting limits without worrying that people are going to turn against me.
And didn't you say recently that I think maybe someone had put your work in their own newsletter?
Yeah, I mean, there's some issues about that.
Okay. Not that I'm not asking for names or anything. I just wanted to point out that that does happen if it does.
Yeah, it definitely does. And, like, it's kind of, sometimes it's very hard to know if it's happening or whether, like, what exactly happened. And I never came out and accused them directly.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not going to, because there's just no point. I did cut off their access to the newsletter. And part of the reason I'm no longer retweeting opportunities is so they can't take advantage of that as well.
Got it.
But yeah, so it's just like, I haven't, or I'm finally getting to the point where I respect what I'm doing enough to realize it's a service that people should be paying for.
Absolutely. Because, I mean, you put hours into it, so.
Yeah, it's like 20 hours pretty much.
Yeah, I mean, that's almost a full-time job. So what would you recommend that most freelancers have multiple streams of income? Not necessarily a newsletter or a Patreon method, although clearly both of us are doing that. But, you know, do you think that most freelancers should try to diversify their income if possible?
I mean, in the ideal world, a freelance writer should be able to subsist entirely on freelance writing. But, I mean, there was recently a conversation about this on Twitter the other day, because someone said you should have diverse streams of income, and other people are saying, no, you should be able to support yourself if you're a freelance writer on freelance writing. And I think, I mean, it depends what you come up with for yourself. Like, it works for some people, it doesn't work for other people. I personally like doing a bunch of different things just because it makes my life more interesting. Mm-hmm. But if you can subsist entirely on pitching articles and writing them, then yeah, by all means, if that's what you want to do it.
Mm-hmm. I think should and what the industry in different areas will support are also two very different things.
Right, absolutely.
You know, like I know Lola Anna Mendez, who included a pitch, a successful pitch to Oprah Magazine in the last newsletter. You know, it seems like she's doing pretty well. She works a lot, like a lot of hours. And I think she may have some other alternate forms of income, but she's just someone who comes to mind as someone that I think of as like a full-time freelancer. But I think that's probably, for the majority of us, just not doable, you know. And maybe that's because she travels a lot or what have you. But for a lot of us, I feel like that's not necessarily feasible.
Yeah, I definitely remember seeing her tweet saying, like, I sent out 30 pitches this week. And it's like, that's a ridiculous amount. And my brain just doesn't work that way. Like, Some people are really good at coming up with ideas instantly and coming up with things they want to write about and angles they want to write about and finding stories. And some people, then it doesn't come as naturally or they just don't have it in them to be pitching that much. And I'm one of those people. I would much rather spend time developing a pitch, send out a few a month, and try to really get those done as opposed to pitching all the time stories I don't particularly care about just to have a byline or just to make money.
Right. That's definitely... sorry, go ahead.
With the branding work I do, it's nice when they say, here's what you need to write about, here's the client. Go forth, and I really don't have to put much creative thought into it.
Right. Like, as soon as we get off the phone, I'm actually going to call the content manager at Laura DiCarlo, which is the sex toy company that I write for. Well, they wouldn't appreciate being called a sex toy company, a sex robotics company.
That's super cool.
Yeah, they actually just sent me a nearly $200 sex toy in the mail, so definite perks to that niche. But, I mean, I like it because it's like, hey, here's what we're doing for August. These are the article topics. Here's the general outline. Go forth. And that is really helpful.
Yeah.
So, what's next on your to-do list? You know, do you have any, you were kind of, saying maybe I'm not sure if this is what I want to do long term. Have you thought about that at all?
I don't know. I don't know. Like right now, I have so much other stuff in my life that I can't really think about the future in
Mm-hmm.
terms of work. I'm moving in a month, and like I need to find an apartment, and because I've been doing the Black Journalist Therapy Relief Fund, I have some work with that right now. It's still going on.
Yeah, do you want to mention that a little bit, just in case people aren't familiar with it?
Sure. So in June, I started the Black Journalist Therapy Relief Fund to help journalists receive financial assistance to get mental health treatment, whether that's medication or therapy. And we raised, how much did I raise? Over $70K on a GoFundMe, and then now I'm working with IWMF, which is the International Women's Media Foundation, and we're partnering to keep the fund going, to legitimize it a bit more. So now it's a 501c3, which means donations are tax deductible, which they weren't originally. And there's going to be a giant promo coming up in September. I'm not sure if I'm allowed to talk about it yet,
Sure.
so I won't. But it's very, very big and very exciting, to the extent that when I got the email about it, I thought it was spam, because I was never expected something like that to happen from us.
That's really great work.
Thank you. If I can share it off the record, I will. I don't know. I'm guessing this isn't live. You're going to be editing this, right?
Yeah, but usually I let them roll through, so we'll just let it. We can just keep it in suspense. You don't have to tell me. It's fine.
Yeah.
Because it's not that I don't, care to edit, but I like people to hear the, the whole conversation, and I don't want to ruin the surprise for myself either. So I'll be around. I'll be watching.
Okay. Sounds good.
So my last question for you is, if you have, and I've tried to ask this of everybody, and I've gotten some really interesting answers so far. What, if any, learns have you had from either your best byline, your worst byline, or both?
What lessons have I learned from that?
Yeah, anything that you were like, oh man, when I wrote this best piece ever, I learned this, or like when I wrote this and it was the worst thing I've ever written, I learned this.
Yeah. I don't know if these aren't really attached to bylines necessarily. They're definitely been attached to articles I was working on. Some of them didn't go, or some of them got cut, some of them didn't. But I mean, something that I actually was thinking about last night is when I was fresh out of college, like my ego was just as big as everyone's is fresh out of college. You think you know everything. And I went into an interview severely underprepared, just kind of assuming that I would be able to wing it. And so I think what I've learned over the years is no matter how much experience you have, you have to come prepared. That is your job. Like, you can't just think, oh, I'm really good at interviewing, I'll be fine going into this. You have to actually, do some research, have questions in mind. Mm-hmm. I mean, it sounds obvious, but...
No, but when you're first getting started, I mean, I think I've told this story on in an interview before, but I was covering this paleontologist who was appealing. This is 2015, and he was trying to get his pardon in before the 2016 election for obvious reasons, and he said he wouldn't accept a pardon from Trump, and he indeed has not been pardoned. But anyways, I was interviewing Margaret Love, who was a presidential pardon attorney under Bush and Clinton, HW, I think, not W. And she just straight up said, "You don't know what the fuck you're talking about." And I mean, I was still in college. Like, I froze. I think I cried. I turned it around, and I got the information that I needed. But I've been there, when you just, even sometimes you're just short on time, but you still have to go in prepared, like you said, with questions and with some research, or else they're just going to be like, listen, you're wasting my time here.
Yeah, I've definitely gotten an email from a potential source on a story that was actually cut. But she was like, you came, you didn't read the book, you wasted my time. And it was unfortunate because I thought that we had an interesting conversation.
Oh, no.
I mean, whatever, it's fine.
Yeah, but I think expecting someone to read an entire book for an interview is a different thing, and sometimes I think you will run into those difficult. I don't know that this is the case, in that particular situation, but sometimes you will run into sources who are a bit difficult and want or expect certain things from you that, like, you as a journalist are not getting paid for those hours to do. Like, there's a lot of unpaid labor in this business.
Oh, absolutely. And then something I've learned from my best bylines, I've been very fortunate to work with an incredible editor at a few places, but one of them in particular, she does what she calls Post-Mortem Conversations. So after a piece gets published, she'll take an hour of her time to talk to the person. I don't know if she does this with everyone or just to newer people. But one of the things she taught me is your piece should go like a train. It should have a clear beginning and a clear end. When the reader starts, they should know where they're going to end up. It can have twists and turns in the middle, but you should never, like, a good journalism piece isn't going to end on a surprise. That's not the point.
Mm-hmm.
Which I always thought was kind of an interesting metaphor and an interesting way to look at it. Because it is true, like, even pieces that are kind of a mystery, in that are, like, that is the point of it, there's suspense and everything. You know what you're getting into, and you know, like, the end isn't going to be about something totally different than the start, if that makes sense. That was a really unclear way of communicating what she said.
I think it makes sense, and all I can say is, I would love to do. I wish all editors did a sort of post-mortem conversation. I feel like that would be incredibly helpful. In fact, I was talking to Caitlin Kelly the other day, who is a writer and journalist from Canada. She lives in the U.S. now, and she was talking about, this sort of, like, these are my words, but the mentorship desert that is journalism. Like, there's no mentorship in this industry anymore, because you're not going to be sitting next to a battle-worn staff writer at the news desk anymore. That just doesn't happen, and so those connections are harder to forge, and I think that's really powerful that she's doing that.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I guess I'm sure someone told her. I mean, I'm sure someone did it for her at one point, and she decided that was the thing to do.
Mm-hmm.
And, like, you didn't do it as much for the last piece I did for her, so maybe it was just the thing she does with new writers. But yeah, I mean, there's so few mentorship opportunities, and that is one of the things that I struggled with boundaries-wise, of trying to be totally accessible to everyone. And it is why I offer to go through people's resumes and try to just answer questions when I can, because you do kind of have to mix and match your mentors as opposed to get one mentor who's going to answer everything anymore.
Right. Well, that was the list of questions that I had for you, but is there anything else that you wanted to bring up or talk about before we go?
Not really.
Okay. Well, I want to thank you for your time. I know you're busy, and I know you're apartment hunting, so I appreciate you taking some time to chat with me today. All right, well, thank you so much, and I'll let you know as soon as this is live. Usually I stagger the release, so patrons get it first, and I'll send it to you, and you can share it however you like, if you like, and then after that, it goes out to the full newsletter list, and that way, kind of in a similar fashion, the people who subscribe get it first, but, you're free to share it whenever, however. It's just that everybody on my end will get it kind of in a staggered release.
Makes sense.
All right. Well, I will send that your way, and thank you so much.
Thank you.
Have a great day. All right. Bye.